I can tell a few people are sick of hearing about this over and over, especially seeing as so many have covered this, but I'm sure we are quite familiar with this theory by now. The slime theory and how it can link to each of the Archons. Despite how old the theory is, it still holds up to what it is even with Fontaine coming around. In summary of the slime theory, each of the elemental slimes share similarities to the Archons, former or current. The animal slime can fly like Venti, the geo slime can shield itself like Zhongli, the electro slime has two different versions representing positive and negative energy, positive being Baal and negative being Beelzebub. And lastly, the dendro slime creating smaller versions of themselves, like how the Greater Lord created another version of her, but smaller, using the branch of Irminsul. As for the rest, it remains a mystery for now until there is more information in the future. However, we are not just looking at the slime theory occasionally, but also the cubes, or technically the hypostasis. You know, those elemental cubes you come across? Yep, those ones. But you must be wondering, why are we using both? Well, the idea for this due to the slimes being able to line up with the status of the current and older Archons. Perhaps the hypostasis can follow this route as well, and on top of that, we could make predictions on what could be happening with the 3 remaining Archons we have yet to learn about. I will go into a little more detail as to why we should consider them for any predictions, but before I do that, I do want to add that this is all in good fun, and not to be taken seriously. And if it does turn out to be right for the future references, then great! We can use it for anything else in the future, and again, to add, this is not going to be accurate, but could still follow up with what is there, but just twist around what it really means. A good example being the assumption of symbolism behind the dendro slimes before we got more information about the dendro archon. Okay, now that we have these parts cleared up, I'm going to cover the hypostasis and how they can link to the archons. In summary, the term hypostasis in reference to the hypostasis refers to an underlying substance that supports the fundamental reality. According to Gnostic Christians, referring to the hypostasis as the Holy Trinity. Does the term Gnostic sound familiar to you? That's right. It's a similar word to the chess pieces for the Archons, the Gnosis. For some more details on the Gnostic, here's where it gets really interesting. In another source on Wiki, here's a composition on one of the sections called Hypostasis of the Archons, which is considered as a compilation of 2 earlier works introduced by a Christian Gnostic. It is also known as the reality of the rulers, or the nature of the rulers. Along with this, Genshin Wiki has also added on with the title that Hypostasis of the Archons is a depiction of the Gnostic mythology, the creation, how the Archons rule over humanity, and ascension of the super-celestial realm of Ogdod. For some more information, Ogdod has some interesting points on Gnosticism and could help with more information for the Shades and Primordial one. That could be something to consider for another video if we get around doing it. Moving back to the subject at hand, there's another thing to point out for the hypostasis in the game, and that is the noticeable knot of the area where you can find them. For each element, it is the same knot symbol. The knot symbol is a noticeable one you would see in Dragonspine and the small island situated at the edge of the map in Mondstadt, and to clarify, this is not the triquetra. We see both the knot and triquetra around Tibet. One example of the triquetra in the domains we visit every day trying to get crit damage and crit rate stats on our artifacts. Yup, that's the one, the wall behind the tree. But moving back to the knot, this is known as Solomon's knot, and this ancient Celtic symbol to represent man's union with the divine, dating back to the First Age and oldest patterns. A symbol attributed to King Solomon. And guess where King Solomon is also featured in? The Lesser Key of Solomon, and from this Lesser Key we find the names of demons such as Morax, Baal, Barbados, and Buer. Even Aseroth is there. With this information in mythology and in game, I believe it is safe to assume that the hypostasis and archons have a link with one another, and a chance that Hoyoverse intentionally wanted to link them with something. As for the slimes on the other hand, well, they are more a coincidence because the theory came to fruition by the coincidence of how the archons and slimes align with similarities. But if we were to look at it from a different perspective, the elements could have something to do with it. Or even the gnosis as the gnosis in term of knowledge in Greek terms and could link to the archons as well, but who knows? After all that information, I hope we haven't lost you all just yet. We still have a long way to go as we analyze the hypostasis in-game to see how they could potentially predict the future of archons. So let's move on by going over how the hypostasis aligns with the 4 archons we already know so far. Now for this case, it will be a bit weird on where to start off with this as for the current information. We weren't too sure how to line it up, so we apologize if it's a bit incoherent. We decided to go ahead and start off with the first 4 for an example of the alignment before we move on. You can skip to here if you want to head straight to the predictions for the Hydro, Pyro, and Cryo Archon. So let's get started by looking at the Animo Cube, Beth. Like the Animo Slime, it also has the ability of flight with the addition of creating wind, just like how Venti can when you hold down his skill to create a wind updrift. There's also mention of storms in the item you can collect from the Hypostasis Hurricane Seed, where it contains Animo energy. And to be honest, the mention of hurricanes reminds me of the situation of Dvalin back in the prologue where we were first introduced to Mondstadt. But in summary, the detail for Beth and Venti is kit related rather than regarding the Archon situation. Another point we want to add is the appearance of Beth. From our perspective, we believe that the appearance of the Hypostasis will be very significant in predicting the situation of the future Archons, and we will look at them for each of the Hypostasises and Archons. Beth, as we can tell just from a glance, looks like a complete wreck with its shelled form cracked and missing a few pieces as they hover around the stimuli of the Hypostasis. This appearance of the Hypostasis can be shared with the Geo and Electro Hypostasis, as well with the exact layout if you look closely and trace it. From my perspective, this could be a link to the Hypostasis and the Archons based on their status, indicating these are the Archons even after the event 500 years ago, the ones that haven't been replaced like the others. Before we continue with this part, we will move to the next Hypostasis. For our next Hypostasis, Gimel is another example, like Beth, where the Hypostasis shares similarities to the Archon's kit, and not their situation. For some pointers on Gimel, Gimel summons pillars all around the arena and hovers on top of either one of them, which could say it is like a shield for the stimuli until you break the pillar it is on top of. These pillars can also create shockwaves, dealing geo damage, similar to the pillars Zhongli can summon, but clearly not as intense as the shockwaves. So personally, I think that these details are enough to cover the similarities. And for the appearance again, there are the details on the cubes that seem so familiar to Zhongli. On top of that, there is the appearance of its withering, which I already mentioned. So now we move on to the third candidate for this section, and that is the Electrohypostasis Elep. For this one, there wasn't too much to go off of for this hypostasis, as we couldn't point out too many obvious points like there were for the Electro Slime to represent electricity. But there is a small section of the boss where it creates a barrier, keeping the main character inside as it releases attacks. If we were to consider this attack, this could align with A with the weekly boss Raiden Shogun. The Raiden Shogun has the power of A, so we can assume A can do something familiar. In one of the fights, she will create a barrier where she will keep them trapped if they stay in the circle for too long and get slashed by her. This was the closest we could get. For the appearance again, this follows with the previous hypostasis. Elep also has a withered appearance, which means this is the same Archon. But I know a lot of you are thinking, wasn't Makoto the first Electro Archon? She was, but both A and Makoto were the Electro Archon. It would sound confusing knowing the rule of the Archon War, so we will use the book Treasured Tales of the Shokin Shinkageuchi to explain to you why this is. According to the book, A sacrificed her physical form so her twin sister, Makoto, can win the seat of the Electro Archon, but Makoto didn't accept this and brought her back as her shadow, the negative energy of electricity. A's name means shadow. From then on, she remains as her sister's shadow and swaps with her sister's physical form for certain tasks. When Makoto died, A made a puppet, so even if the puppet is there, A can still take their physical form. And to add, A's consciousness lies in the sword she takes out of her chest. So A and Makoto both ruled as the Archon together, with A being Makoto's shadow. So when Makoto died, A was still there, which technically means that she is the original Archon, like Zhongli and Venti, hence the appearance of the hypostasis. Hopefully that makes more sense to fill in for the link up. We're almost there now for the current Archons. Lastly for this section is the Dendrohypostasis, Zane. Now right off the bat, the Dendrohypostasis in appearance compared to the other three is different. It isn't as broken up, but rather has small cracks along the corner and edges. For this situation, it can link up to a different scenario for the Dendro Archon, indicating that they are the same, but at the same time they aren't. This in turn would link up with the Samsara. Also worth mentioning that Ruka Devata and Kusanali both have the same demon name, Booer. So from looking at the appearance of the hypostasis, it's probably linking up to the Archon being new, but not really. As for the similarities with the Dendro Archon and Zan, The closest to what we have is how the fight goes with Zayn. In this, we do beat them, but this time, rather than destroying the cores, we are healing them using Dendro. This could be in link with how Irminsul is sick because of the forbidden knowledge, and how the Greater Lord was affected by this, resulting in her death. I could also mention Nahida's skill when targeting opponents. It looks quite similar to the knot symbol in the area for all the hypostases. I wonder if that means anything significant in the future. Well then, now we have covered the 4 Archons of the Hypostasis, and thus we are down to the remaining 3 with little information, but with a few pointers that could link to at least something. So you know how I said the appearance of the Hypostasis was going to play an important part in predicting the other Archons? Well, based on what I have for the previous Archons, I think you know where I'm going with this, and this is including the status of the new Archon. And before I move on, I want to clarify that what we are using will not be predicting the age of an Archon, but rather how long this Archon has been the status of one, with the example of Nahida as she is the youngest Archon. So then, with Fontaine coming soon, let's start off with a Hydrohypostasis, He. Yes, that is the name of the Hydrohypostasis. Moving straight to the appearance of the Hypostasis, He has an appearance different to the previous ones we have mentioned before. This one looks completely new. No gaps or missing parts or cracks along the edges. Fresh out of the box it seems for this one. In my opinion, this could mean the Hydro Archon is a completely new Archon, not the same god after the disaster, and not a reincarnation or rebirth of the same god, just someone completely different from the former Hydro Archon. And personally, I hope that that is the case, because having the twist of previous 2 being the same Archon has been a bit repetitive. But in conclusion, gaps and cracks are the same Archons. A few small cracks are reincarnated former gods, and none of those things is a new Archon in control. For some remaining parts of the Hypostasis, during the process of the Hypostasis healing and the fight in the arena, there are 2 types of Hydro slimes that appear, a dark blue one and a light blue one. And if you look at the preview of what Folklore looks like, her right eye is light blue and her left eye is dark blue. It could mean something. Perhaps this is a symbolism of balance, or indicating she has a split personality along the scales. If you were to consider her like one other character, how about Sela from Honkai Impact? In Honkai, there are 2 different versions of Sela, and the other can take control of the body, which in one of the chapters in the cutscene symbolizes it with the scale. Could it be familiar to Folklore if she was in reference to Sela? Sela being the god of justice sounds about right with many things. But as we don't know a lot about her, there isn't much we can say for confirmation, but we will know more for sure after we progress in Fontaine. Let's move on to the next god in Hypostasis, Ayin, Pyro. For this hypostasis, the appearance follows the same as the Dendrohypostasis. At first glance, we mistaken it as the same as the Hydrohypostasis being new, but through closer inspection, the Pyrohypostasis has small cracks. If you were to compare the lineup of both the Dendro and Pyrohypostasis through the archive, the lineup is the exact same for the cracks, so from the speculation of the cracks, the new Pyro Archon could be a reincarnation of the former Archon. Along with this, there's a small hint in the Tevat trailer that could speculate more on the Pyro Archon being a reincarnation. For the preview of Notlin in the trailer, it is called Chapter 5, Incandescent Ode of Resurrection. Speculating from what Dainsleif says for Notlin, the idea of resurrection and the death of losing and rising to victory seems to play a big role for the story itself. Another point to add regarding the hypostasis once more, when you defeat the Pyrohypostasis and lose, the hypostasis explodes. Along with that, so does the Pyro Slime if it hasn't been extinguished by Hydro. Could this be because the former Pyro Archon lost in the event 500 years ago? She stuck to her word and the losers must burn to ash? But well then, on to our last candidate, the Cryohypostasis, Daleth, for our good old Cryo Archon. Getting straight into it, looking at the appearance of the hypostasis, it is fresh and new, just like the Hydrohypostasis. So this can indicate that the Cryo Archon, the Tsaritsa, is a new Archon. When the cube is in a healing state, it shields itself, and you need to break the shield. The Cryo Slime as well has a shield that you need to break down, which I believe is a symbolism of the Archon trying to harden herself with the events in order to go against Celestia. In one of Child's voice lines, he says,
Her Royal Highness, the Tsaritsa, is actually a gentle soul. Too gentle, in fact. And that's why she had to harden herself. Likewise, she declared war against the whole world only because she dreams of peace. And because she made an enemy of the world, I had the chance to become acquainted with you.
Adding that she is gentle. The events of 500 years ago that killed the former Cryo-Archon may have affected her and resulted in her trying to make a change. According to NPC Nadia, blizzards can last for a month straight and despite being in the midst of danger. Even Child saying they'll freeze to death if they don't keep moving. It could mean the weather as well is affected by the Tsaritsa's emotions, similar to what happened with A during the decree. What do you think it could be for the Tsaritsa? Okay, that is everything covered. That was a lot, and hopefully this wasn't too much to take in, because honestly, this is a long script. We looked back at the link to the Hypostasis and Archons, how they copy their behavior or kit, and if this can predict the events of the future Archons, we have yet to see. We still have a long way to go in the game, so not everything will be accurate or correct. We hope you find this helpful or interesting, and perhaps we will see you soon for another analysis, theory, or summary. See you soon!